Pinkertons Ghosts is a horror anthology podcast by Superversive Radio, with no affiliation with any detective agency, person, real or imagined, or the dark forces of Autre Terre. It is not intended for children. This is Jim Donavan. The time is 9 a.m. and I'm in my office. Control, you may recall that Mordred Padam sent me documents exonerating Jack and implicating the Fae in the bombing of the Burbank Hotel. I had faxed those documents to Pittance St. Devay, hoping he'd be able to use them, that I'd be able to move on with my life. Unfortunately, Pittance sent me a terse text message that read, "Mr. Donovan, I am not a detective, but an attorney. Please investigate these matters and then send me your findings." I hate that foghorn leghorn wannabe. Long story short, what Mordred provided was written conversations and recordings about a plan to frame Jack. Most of the people involved, excepting Lana Hawkwood, were Fae. Someone was working a deal with Lana. What she got out of it? I don't know. I want to know. I want to take it from her. But Jack? No one used their real names except when they talked about him, and it was mostly very disparaging. He was a patsy, the person they blamed. But for what? Lana mentioned me a couple times, but the language was clear. To quote, "He has to be there. M demands it." I know too many damned M's. Mordred? No. He's not messy like that. Morgana? No one mentioned Sean. Probably wasn't her. Maybe M stood for mother. Or... who knows? Lana did drop the name of a bomb maker. I gave the right tips to the right police officers. The guy was found empty-eyed in his house's shed. Turns out he'd overdosed years ago, and Lana had pickled his brains. Officer Haw wrote down suicide, and everyone politely moved on, except for a very incredulous prosecutor hungry for promotion. St. Devay was thorough when he told me that he needed more ammo than a desiccated corpse and a poster of Ted Kaczynski to get this dismissed before a judge. Especially after the media circus and convincing manifesto that spread. I hate motivated people. Well, Mordred had been as good to his word as I could expect him to be. I knew where I had to go next. I don't have many ins with the fairy courts. Sean is more of the go-to guy where the Fae are involved. I know about the Leonon She, that was being more or less held hostage by pop icon Jenny Abernathy, and I had briefly obtained help from Puck, yes, that Puck, when it came time to punish the drunk brownie that had nearly killed my next-door neighbor. But he certainly wasn't my biggest fan. He did say that if I needed him again, though, I could make a formal request to the Fae courts. This was not going to be fun. There are certain areas where the veil between the mortal world and the Autre Terre are a little slimmer. Much like heaven and hell, the realms of the Autre Terre is parallel to our own dimension, but tweaked just enough so that they only occasionally intersect. Much like one can go to hell in certain places and locations, one can get to the Autre Terre in specific locations or at special times. Heaven is, of course, much better guarded. Griffith Park was my destination, the very location of my first case, after the new servers during the, purge. I was looking for Oberon's court. He tends to prefer wildlife and nature to the rigid rules of man and cities. And Griffith is a hub of power, an oasis amidst the concrete desert that is Los Angeles. There are little areas where you can walk and feel the hairs on the back of your neck prick. That's usually a sign that you're being watched by something. I walked alone until I felt that very tugging in the spirit, and when I felt it, I slipped my sight into the Verimvicio. The Fae cloak themselves from mortal sight, but they are fascinated by us. They spy on us to see what we do, and sometimes work mischief on us. In the Vicio, I could pierce their veil. I had considered bringing Siren's Bane with me, the very ring whose existence had caused this whole mess. The ring dispels magical effects and grants the users the gift of Elisha, as Sean calls it. Unfortunately, I have not figured out a way to keep the decloaking effects while nullifying the anti-magical field that the ring produces. That's a problem for future Jim. That guy is screwed. I opened myself to the threads of reality, to see things as they truly are, and I spotted a dryad, a creature that is half man, half tree. It was a young sapling, likely a teenager or young woman by their standards. Her skin was a pale green, and instead of hair, she had leaves that cascaded from her head like a waterfall. Each leaf was vibrant, healthy, and green. She wore a light shift that swayed in an unseen breeze, never quite getting to the point of immodesty. As she was one of the Fae folk, she was, indeed, fair to look upon. Imagine Halle Berry in her prime, but without the arrogance that comes so naturally from actors. Once I slipped in and looked at her, she knew that I could see her, and she started to turn away. Dryads are very slow-moving, so I spread my hands out and said, "Child of Oberon, I, Jim Donavan, seek an audience with either the king himself or a member of his court. Please relay my humble request to your lords and ladies." She ponderously turned her head back to me and winked. Then she disappeared in a flurry of helicopter leaves and pine needles. She left behind a cedar scent that reminded me of home. I slipped out of the Veramvicio and waited there for a time. I sat down on the grass in the shade of an oak tree and contemplated taking a nap. I had just decided to take that rest when I was startled by the sound of trumpets blaring. Not the brassy sound of earthen trumpets, but the low rumble of a horn made out of wood or stone. It's a different sort of bass reverberation, one that mortal man rarely ever hears anymore. Out from behind a shaded maple tree stepped the most terrifying and beautiful man I've ever seen. Control, I've seen creatures that defy imagination before. I've met demons and gods. I've met fae and monsters. This creature was muscular in a way that would put a bodybuilder to shame, but his frame was so proportioned so that none of it seemed unnatural or artificial. It took me a second to realize that he was totally naked. Each limb was perfectly connected to the torso, so that he moved with a grace that seemed liquid. I've heard fae compared to cats before, but this man was so graceful that he'd make a cat look like a drunken Saint Bernard. He carried a slender wooden sword at his side. Though wooden, it was sharpened to a razor's edge. He was, of course, barefoot, but each step pushed grass aside rather than crushed it. In a voice that sounded like velvet rubbed against a silver doorknob, he said, "James Donavan," drawing out each syllable deliberately and with great purpose. In my court you art known. Long have I wanted to meet the mortal whom they call Loki's Bane. And that you would seek an audience? I find myself intrigued by your boldness. Count yourself fortunate that I'm not offended by your brashness. At that last, all the warmth in his eyes and voice disappeared as suddenly as a fart in the wind. Just as quickly as it had vanished, though, it returned. I sketched my most courtly bow in an attempt to not offend. Always a dangerous prospect with the Fae. And said, "May I presume that I have the honor of standing in the presence of King Oberon?" "You may so presume, child. Through your use of the Magi's art, you have declared yourself one of my subjects. Therefore, speak. What wouldst you have of your king?" I did not know that was how things were. I wonder if this was one of the chain of consequences that my guardian angel had mentioned to me for my consistent use of the Veramvicio. I don't know that I like this. I wonder if that was how Lana contracted with the Fae. Your Majesty, as one of your subjects, I fear that I have come into disagreement with another Magi who would fall under your authority. I had to think quickly, of course, because this new information had kind of changed my plans a little bit. Lana Hawkwood has disturbed the peace of this city that I live in, and has cast blame for it upon one of my boon companions. Put bluntly, I seek to know if the court was involved in the death of 16 Masons and 10 innocents at the Burbank Hotel, and the wounding of diverse others. Oberon's smile took on a predatory glint. I fain would tell you, but there is no sport in something given for nothing. Therefore, do me a little favor, James, and I shall not only give you the information you seek, I shall give to you the perpetrator of this crime, all wrapped in a conveniently tied bow. Favors to the Fae are notoriously bad. I didn't want to, but apparently I had to. If only to get Jack off my back for going out with Jennifer while he was being falsely accused for a terrorist attack. As though that was my fault. What would you have of me, Oberon King? There is a race of fearsome, sea-dwelling giants, the Fomorians. Know you of them? Through a long and flowery conversation, which I will spare you, Fomorians are the natural enemy of the Fae, and King Oberon was asking me to slay a creature in Malibu that had been threatening Oberon's interests in America. Apparently, it had been a slow season for the Fae, as Oberon told me to slay the monster, but to not do so quickly. He gave it the name Baelor, and told me to watch out for his eyes. And then, King Oberon vanished without a trace. And I was transported to a seaside, standing on the beach, surrounded by pelicans and seagulls. It was a cold and cloudy day, not quite rainy, but definitely threatening it, so the beach had very few people on it. I could see out in the ocean a few dolphins playfully frolicking in the water. All this was perfectly ordinary for a fall day at the beach. And then, from behind a beach cliff, I saw a 15-foot-tall monstrosity amble its way towards some humans that had been lazily strolling along the shore. Its gray skin was covered in a yellow mucus from head to toe. It had one left arm, no right arm, that was so long it stretched past the knees, and it had 2 elbows. Its arm moved in a disgustingly disjointed way, bending back and forth, whereas human elbows only bend one way. The monster had 3 eyes, one a dull green, one a dull orange, and one a bright, vibrant blue. It had no eyelids. It always stared straight ahead. It stank worse than low tide, smelling like 1,000 beached whales, all decaying in the sun. The 2 strollers stopped their meandering and looked at the monster. I'm pretty sure they were both women, because I saw long hair. But from 100 feet away, bundled as they were in sweatshirts and jeans, kinda hard to know for sure. One woman ran away from the creature, but they were still in the sand, and she did not run fast. The monster didn't even attempt to chase after her. Instead, it took its one hand and covered its green eye, so that only the blue and orange one showed. The orange eye glowed like a blazing bonfire, and I watched as she screamed a cry that I've never heard a mortal give. We've all watched horror movies and scream queens, but nothing can compare to the sheer panic and pain of a human being that is burned from the inside out. I'll have that sound haunt my dreams for years to come, though at this point, it's going to be fighting for position with all the other nightmares I have. She burst into flames and kept on screaming, trying to rush into the surf to extinguish the burn, but she sank to her knees, unable to take more than a few steps before she collapsed and expired. The screaming, mercifully, stopped. Her friend was frozen in panic as the monster lumbered up to her. This time, it covered its orange and green eye with its one oddly flexible arm, and the blue eye flashed brighter than the sky on a clear day. She remained frozen, immobile. The monster stepped up closer to her. I myself had been rooted to the ground in shock at seeing such a thing, and was equally shocked at the speed with which all of this had transpired. It hadn't been more than 10 seconds from it arriving to immolating a woman and paralyzing another. As it stepped closer, I shouted at her to run, run, run away! Get out while she still could. She didn't even tremble. I dragged the soul stone out of my pocket and tried to reach out to see what threads of magic bound her. But before I could fully sink into the reality beyond reality, Baelor the Fomor had grabbed the woman with its one hand and bit her head clean off. There was no blood. I do not know what magics it wielded, but it was like he was eating a piece of woman jerky. I had 2 more victims to add to my ledger. 2 more tragedies that I was unable to save from a gruesome fate. Now all I could do was avenge them. The Verum Vicio was open to me now, even though it wasn't in time to save the woman. The Baelor was busy chewing on the second. The first was still smoldering as the tide was starting to get close enough to lick out the flames. I didn't see anything especially useful. I'm not experienced with hydromancy, the art of manipulating water, though I suppose it is something I should get better at someday. This, however, was not someday. Instead, I saw something. As the Fomorian was standing on the sand, eating its prize, it had to constantly shift its feet to keep from sinking. I could manipulate that. Quicksand works on the principle that water displaces the sand particles, essentially coming to life, or quickening. If the mixture is severe enough, it can drown a man. When I was growing up, I thought it would be a much bigger problem than it turned out to be. Curse you, Disney Channel! I just had to introduce more ocean just beneath the sand. You know, cause a low tide just a little sooner than expected. During the Loki case last year, I had created a localized increase in gravity to crush some wolves. I don't think I could do anything quite that extreme right now, but I could increase the pull right underneath the Fomorian, which would work to not only drag more water to him, but also push him deeper into the sand itself. While there would probably be some long-term ecological implications to what I was about to do, I didn't really care. This thing needed to die. It still hadn't seen me, and it was still slowly gnawing on its woman jerky. I sat down on the beach and concentrated. I had to surrender my will to the anger I felt at the women being so heinously murdered, since raw emotion supercharges the soul stone. I'm still a little scared of the long-term impact of that, especially since Oberon informed me that my use of magic rendered me a subject of the Fey courts. The Fomorian did not appear a smart creature, but even it noticed that something was amiss when it started sinking into the sand. It tried to pull its feet up and out, but the water from the ocean seeped in so quickly that the monster could not properly pull its feet out. It struggled and thrashed, trying to yank its legs out of the miry muck with its one long arm. I refused to let it. A trickle of blood ran from both my eyes, my ears, and my nose. But it didn't matter. This thing was going to die. It submerged deeper and deeper, struggling faster and faster, until only its neck remained above the tide and sand. It let out a sad, keening noise. It was frightened. Good. I allowed myself to drift back to reality bit by bit. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay in the Visio. I didn't feel the pains in my mortal body when I was in the Visio. I felt a heady rush of power each time I submerged myself. But I had a mission to complete. The monster had ended with its head facing away from me. This was good. I didn't want to be fried or petrified. I pulled out the 1911 that I keep concealed on my person. Legally, thanks to my private investigator's license. I walked, hobbled, up to the creature. Its moans sounded plaintive and sad, deep hooning that would tear at my heart, were I a more sensitive man. I approached from behind and to the side. 3 times I shot the monster in its right green eye. I circled clockwise and put 3 bullets in its left orange eye. Each time, the monster's screams went from sad to angry, wild with pain and agony. It tried to thrash, but its one arm was not sufficient to break the iron grip of the sand. I continued circling until I came upon the middle blue eye. I emptied the rest of my magazine into this final eye, silencing its disgusting cries once and for all. As soon as it was over, I collapsed into the sand and dialed up my contact at Days. He'd cordoned the area and see that a properly sufficient excuse was given to the families of the dead women. He gave me some rote speech, thanking me for ending a deadly threat to the public safety, promised me a bounty of $100,000 deposited directly once it cleared a Senate subcommittee. This basically means that I'd see some financial reward sometime after 2050, I'm sure. Good. Wasn't sure how I'd pay taxes on monster-killing money anyway. I don't even know if we have an accountant that works for the Paranormal Pinkertons. After I finished talking on the phone, I stared out over what I had wrought. There were several seagulls coming to perch on the head. The tide was coming ever closer, but it wasn't quite lapping at the base of its skull. Not yet. Well, not anymore, once I had released my grip on gravity. Behind me, I heard the sound of summer birds tweeting, and felt a fresh breeze at my back, the opposite direction that the wind blows at the ocean. Beside me, King Oberon sat down. Without looking at him, I said, "Forgive me for discourtesy, but I am too tired to stand and bow." Oberon chuckled and said, "You slaying mine enemy is all the obeisance I require of you. Now, James, I believe there is a matter of recompense for this feat. What I will tell you will be soft. It will shake you to the core. Brace yourself." I was too tired to care, so I turned toward him and grunted. Oberon, clearly hoping for more, let disappointment shine on his face for just a second. But ever the showman, he continued, "You are being courted by the Morrigan, a goddess of the Fae." He let that hang for a second. I blinked. The name sounded familiar. Wait, Morgana? Is that the same as Morgana, King Arthur's half-sister? The one that's been giving my friend Sean so much trouble? Oberon waved his hand. No, of course not. She is but a witch. Powerful by your standards, ageless but not immortal. No, the Morrigan is far older and more powerful. She is a clever shapeshifter who, when she loves a mortal man, seeks to ruin him so that he becomes hers, body and soul. She contracted with my subject, Lana Hawkwood, to kill those men and frame your companion. But why? Why would Lana kill Masons? I thought they were on the same team. Oberon shrugged, a motion that even he could not manage to make look regal. Apparently, your friend Morrow has become too dangerous for them to confront directly, so they sought to use mortal law. Do not worry. Your courts care for physical evidence. He said this with a distasteful grimace. So I shall ensure that all such is destroyed in his favor. Your barrister should hear shortly that all charges against Jack Morrow shall be dropped. You are kind, King Oberon, to provide a way for me to exonerate my friend. But how do I stop or confront this Morrigan, or even Lana, who contracted her help? Oberon looked at me with a steady gaze and said, I do not know. The Morrigan is beyond me, as she is a goddess. Whatever you choose to do, seek Cuchulainn, the Gaelic warrior. He may tell you his tale, and if so, you may learn how to defeat or at least confound the Morrigan. As for the Lady Hawkwood, I will not work to set one subject against another. My court will have order. I would advise you to either handle your feud with her peacefully, or finally. I cannot claim to care either way. I nodded and said, Is that all between us this time? Oberon laughed heartily and said, Oh, James, you are mine. I will call upon you as I need you, and you shall call upon me when you are in need. This is how the subject-lord relationship works. For now, consider our obligations met, set, and even. Until next time, James Donavan, I bid you adieu. And with that, he disappeared. I don't know, Control. I'm a little scared about this one. Don't know the implications. Let Jack know that I think he'll be fine. A bit unnerved at the prospect of the Fae destroying physical evidence. I hope no innocent people are going to get caught up in it. But they'll do what they want. Until next time, this is Jim Donavan. Over and out. Pinkerton's Ghosts is a podcast distributed by Superversive Radio, licensed under an attribution non-commercial, share-alike international license. This episode was written by Ken Dickerson and performed by the same. Ben Wheeler edits, directs, produces, and herds cats. Ken Dickerson performs our audio editing. Visit us on Facebook, read articles on superversivesf.com, or listen to us on unauthorized Acast, iTunes, or Spotify. Contact us through Twitter at @PinkertonsGhosts, email us at pinkertonsghosts@gmail.com, or send us noble messenger possums with messages strapped to their backs. Don't worry, they know how to find us. Thank you for listening, and good luck.